Here we go.
Welcome to another episode of Sounds Reasonable. I am your host, Dr. Brad, and I am joined in the production of our weekly show by Tim, Tracy, and Abby. We are all members of the Free Thought community, and our Sounds Reasonable website can be found on Facebook. Do you experience frequent irrational thoughts, a pervasive belief in a divine Skynet, an insatiable urge to read horoscopes, perform spells, speak in tongues, or pray? Fortunately, you're now listening to the cure for these ailments. Sounds Reasonable. This show is dedicated to bringing you, the listener, the latest news in free thought, science, logic and reason, and politics and religion. And of course, we encourage you to share your thoughts with us after every episode by posting comments and asking questions on our Facebook page. What is free thought? What does it mean to be a free thinker? The dictionary definition is a person who forms opinions about religion based on reason, independent of tradition, authority, or established belief. Here's Christopher Hitchens' working definition. Our belief is not a belief. Our principles are not a faith. We do not rely solely upon science and reason because these are necessary rather than sufficient factors, but we distrust anything that contradicts science or outrages reason. Excuse me. We may differ on many things, but what we respect is free inquiry, open-mindedness, and the pursuit of ideas for their own sake. We will now move on to our science news segment, and remember that the scientific mind is one that allows its perceptions of reality to be constrained by good evidence and good argument. When it comes to good health, most everyone thinks of diet and exercise as the two most important components of getting there. However, just like most anything else, it is possible to have too much of a good thing, at least when it comes to high intensity exercise. Tim has the story. So Tim, should I be worried about my CrossFit workouts?
Well, thanks, Dr. Brad, for the intro. And when I first read this story, I was kind of, I thought about you and the CrossFit, and I was kind of wondering the same thing. So maybe here at the end, we'll discuss that possibility a little bit. So. My science segment today comes from The Scientist, on broadcast or published on March 22nd, written by Shauna Williams, and is titled "Extreme Exercise Carries Metabolic Consequences: The Study." Healthy people put through high-intensity interval training, or HIIT, displayed insulin resistance and mitochondrial dysfunction after working out excessively. As a researcher at the Swedish School of Sports and Health Science, Flip Larson, would hear anecdotes about the downsides of too much exercise, a common enough phenomena that nevertheless puzzled him. Quote, "All athletes know it. If you train too much, something happens. Your legs feel terrible after a while, and then if you just continue, you have these psychological disturbances too, like mood disturbances," he says. Quote, "That hasn't been really described in the literature. No one knows exactly what's going on." To find out, Larson and his colleagues recruited 11 healthy young people and put them through a 4-week, increasingly intense regime of sessions on a stationary bike while monitoring their glucose tolerance and mitochondrial function. During the toughest week, the subjects displayed insulin resistance and other deleterious metabolic changes. The team reported March 18th in Cell Metabolism this year. Typically, cardiometabolic health improves with greater exercise volumes. And the results indicate that there's a point at which those benefits stop occurring. The subject's mitochondria collected via muscle biopsies did show improved capacity during the first 2 weeks of the workout schedule. During the high intensity interval training, subjects warmed up and then were asked to maximize their power output over 4 or 8 minute intervals, interspersed with 3-minute breaks. The training started out relatively light, with 36 total minutes of high intensity intervals spread out over the week, not including warm up or rest times. In the following moderate week, subjects completed 90 total minutes of intervals. Among other findings, the researchers determined that a measure of metabolic efficiency known as intrinsic mitochondrial respiration improved over that time, as did the physiological parameters such as oxygen consumption. That changed in the 3rd week. Designed to represent excessive training, during which the participants completed a grueling 152 minutes of intervals over the course of the week. After that, the subject's intrinsic mitochondrial respiration fell by an average of 40% compared with the samples taken at the end of the moderate intensive week, the researchers reported. Furthermore, the subject's glucose tolerance, measured by their glucose levels before and after they consumed a sweet drink, also dropped. Between the light training week and at the end of the excessive week, no oral glucose test was performed after the moderate training week, for whatever reason, I'm not sure. It's quite similar to the changes that you see in people that are starting to develop diabetes or insulin resistance, Larson said. After a recovery period during which participants completed 53 minutes of intervals spread across the week, most measures rebounded. The subject's oxygen consumption and power output during exercise, as measured by how hard they pedaled, were higher after recovery than at baseline or at any other point during the experiment, for example. Intrinsic mitochondrial respiration had not fully recovered by the end of the experiment, though remaining 25% lower after recovery than it had been in the moderate week. In a second component of the exercise, researchers monitored blood glucose levels in 15 elite athletes who were subjected to an intervention and in matched non-athletic controls. On average, the two groups levels were given 24-hour period on average, the two groups levels over a given 24-hour period were about the same, but the athletes spent more time with glucose levels either above or below the normal range than the team reports. Although the study didn't examine what, if any, long-term health consequences might arise from excessive exercise, Larson sees the implications as chiefly academic. After all, elite athletes tend to be a really healthy bunch, he says, and furthermore, getting too little exercise is far more common problem than getting too much. Brent Ruby, an exercise researcher at the University of Montana, calls the study incredibly well designed, but he questions whether the levels of exercise in the study's 3rd week were applicable to anyone in real life. Even the most narcissistic exercise addicts would likely not put themselves in this situation, he says. Linda Pescatello, who studies the health effects of exercise at the University of Connecticut but was not involved in the study, says she suspects the findings on the effects of overexercising do indeed have real life ramifications, with individuals having different thresholds of overexercise depending on their fitness levels. Quote, these extreme forms of exercise in this article are not applicable to the general recreational exercises, but I think the overarching principles about training are, she says. She points to a 2020 review article that found associations between very high levels of exercise and what the authors call potential cardiac maladaptations, such as coronary artery calcification. Quote, I guess the bottom line is, especially for the average person, all in moderation if you want to maximize health benefits of exercise, she says. Study co-author Mike Flockhart, also at the Swedish School of Sport and Health Sciences, says that it's not clear where the tolerable limit of training is. Especially because the study indicates that overexercise doesn't necessarily lead to a decline in actual athletic performance. Knowing what the limit is, he says, would be helpful to athletes and their coaches. Now, I also looked at a related article by Shauna Williams that was also published in the Scientist, but that was in June of 2019, titled Metabolism Hits the Ceiling in Athletic Endurance Feats. So in long distance physical training, physically taxing events, the amount of energy athletes can expend appears to peak about 2.5 times their metabolic resting rate. The authors speculated that the maximum was likely dictated by how many calories they can digest. And they were talking about how we all have limits, and the study suggests that those limits are pretty similar among individual humans, at least at the metabolic level. Researchers tracked runners' energy expenditures before and after they competed the equivalency of a marathon 6 days a week for nearly 5 months straight. Then compared their results with studies of other high-intensity activities and found that the longer the event, the lower the metabolic rate participants were able to sustain. The maximum metabolic rate for long-term activities, they reported in June of 2019 in Science Advances, was about 2.5 times an individual's resting energy use, likely a reflection of a limit of the number of calories human digestive systems are able to absorb. At least that's what they were speculating. So in that study, they used individuals in an event called Race Across the USA, in which participants ran from Huntington Beach, California to Washington, D.C. over several months, covering an average of 42 kilometers per day. They used 6 of the 12 runners in their study, and a week before the event began in January 2015, they dosed them with a doubly labeled water containing isotopes of hydrogen and oxygen. The participants then turned in samples of their urine in days leading up to and just after the start of the race. And by analyzing relative portions of isotopes present, they calculated the runner's energy expenditure rates. They repeated the labeled water dosing and sample collection at the end of the race. The runner's energy expenditure rose sharply by the 5th day of the race relative to the baseline pre-running values, but by the end of the race, their metabolisms had slowed a bit comparing to their rates on day 5. This is total energy expenditure plateaus as people reach higher activity levels, perhaps because the body compensates for calories used in movement by dialing back the energy used for other physiological processes. The research team then compared that data to those of metabolic rates published in studies on demanding physical challenges such as the Tour de France, the 100-mile ultra marathons, and even pregnancy. Plotting those data, they found a steep drop-off in participants' metabolic rates with increased duration of the event. The trend line for that curve flattened at about 2.5 times participants' base level metabolic rates. Now they believe that it's not a limit of how much food is available or how fast you can stuff your face, but a limit on what your digestive tract is able to absorb. Now, I think it would be interesting to see what happens to their intrinsic mitochondrial respiration over that time, as well as their physiological oxygen consumption in those athletes. Is it connected to their peak mitochondrial energy expenditures? Well, I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so overtraining has been an issue with a number of athletes, and something that has to be very closely monitored. And I'm most familiar with overtraining as it relates to weightlifting.
Right.
And I know back, about 10 years ago when I was in my 20s.
Yes.
Just kidding, folks. However, back when I was in my 20s, I remember I was really getting into weight training, and I did overtrain. I was just designing my own workouts, doing everything on my own. I didn't have a coach of any kind. And, when you overtrain with weights, where you typically notice it is injury. I mean, you're going to have some muscle breakdown from weight training, and you have to give your body time for that to recoup. And I was just so motivated and excited to keep things going that I didn't give myself sufficient rest. And of course, I ended up with an injury, and then you're set back more than you would have been if you would have just rested. So yeah, so that's obviously an issue that every athlete has to be aware of.
What do you think with the
Yeah,
with the
when I
CrossFit?
did CrossFit,
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Tracy.
when I did CrossFit, I did that for a couple of years, and then I was afraid I was going to overdo it, so I thought maybe I should taper back.
What's
That's what happened.
what's the length of those intense workouts with CrossFit?
It varies. Some
Yeah.
some of them will be as short as 4 or 5 minutes. Others can be 20, 25 minutes. So that's typical range for CrossFit workouts.
I'm kind of
It's
curious.
so fast, really fast
Right.
intervals. Like,
I'm kind of curious about the changes in mood. I guess kind of looking at that, I know you had mentioned that it can lead to changes in mood or kind of mood swing type things. I wonder what the underlying process is for that, and if it's anything related to like the runner's high and ideas of increasing like basically dopamine during exercise. I don't know. That's what stuck out to me as like, what is that mechanism, and is that related to that idea?
Go ahead, Tim.
I was just to say I was thinking the same thing. I was thinking more maybe hormonal.
Right, and that's what I was going to say is that when you start to overtrain, of course, that's quote unquote read by your body as stress, and so you start to pump out adrenal gland hormones in response to that, and that that leads to mood change. So that was also something that I was aware of back in my weightlifting days. I always ask people, well, to tell me if I'm starting to be angry all the time.
if I turn green, if I start turning green,
You won't like me if you get angry. You're not gonna.
Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
Yeah. I know our track coach at the high school has changed his workout routines with the triathletes to shorter overall training, overall workout time is shorter, and then but increasing some of the intensity of the workouts during that time period, and not as long, but a little trying to work them more at competition level intensities over short periods of time, instead of that drawn out longer, less intense workout. So he's read quite a few studies on that method.
I was going to say, I read a article, it's probably been a couple of years, about how the interval training, like what you're talking about, being higher intensity for shorter periods of time, has just as many, if not more, benefits than longer endurance type training. But I also maybe think that it has something to do with what like what you want to get out of it, I guess. I mean, if you want those, I mean, competition style effects versus if you're going for endurance.
Right. Yeah, and I think there's a little different, obviously a difference in how they handle the training with the distance runners, obviously versus under 800, sprinters.
Yeah, yeah, definitely so.
So
No,
do you think, do those go both ways? I guess, like, I maybe I missed this in the article, but the over exercising, does that go both for endurance and intensity, or is it more related to one or the other?
Well, I think they were, that's the thing, when they were looking at, of course, those that were doing that grueling cross-country run
Yeah.
over several months, and then the Tour de France, that study was just looking at, there's a limit to, their metabolic rate as far as how much it increases. But they didn't really get into, what, or they, I guess they said they weren't sure what effect that had on overall athletic.
Of course, there's a huge difference with the people they're looking at versus the general public. And
Right,
Mhm.
right.
these are your top level elite athletes that they were looking at in this study, correct, Tim?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So,
Right.
so for the most part, I would say the general public has little to worry about.
Yeah.
This mainly applies to the highest, the athletes at the highest level. So,
But I suppose you could, well, and they do talk about how, I mean, you're probably better off, instead of going out and doing that, 4-mile power walking, by just, doing a maybe a little higher intensity power walk for a shorter distance. And it's probably less wear and tear overall on joints and those types of things. I guess I would speculate.
I mean, I do think that, I mean, people can get like addicted to exercise. And so overall, it's probably not a big concern for the general public, but you do have those people that they start exercising and they start taking it to the extreme. And so, I mean, that could be something with here, I guess, with this article too, because if you reach that like metabolic plateau and you keep pushing yourself, I think that's when you see those adverse side effects. So
And I guess maybe just the thought that, the more intense I go, the higher my metabolism is going to be. Well,
Mhm.
this is actually showing no, it's not going to be. I mean,
Right.
you're going to plateau and stay there.
That's really interesting, Tim. It's a good
Yeah.
article.
yeah, thanks so much for that story, Tim.
That.
And we will be right back with more Sounds Reasonable after this short break.
All alive. The devil's in the detail, lingered inside. Oh, a holy crime. But how can I hide you without an alibi? It's a lover's fight without an alibi. You took my innocence. I can't wait no longer. I'm playing with the monsters. Everything that brought me alive. Going wrong like nonsense. Playing with the monsters. They brought me alive, but got no alibi. It's a lover's fight without an alibi. You took my innocence without an alibi.
Oops, sorry for the abrupt end.
And we're back with more Sounds Reasonable on April 11th, 2021. Matt Gaetz, the ultra Trump supporter currently serving in the House of Representatives, but perhaps soon to be serving in the big house, finds himself in all kinds of trouble. Interestingly, Gaetz may have realized that that was going to be the case, at least based on our upcoming story. Abby has the details. So, Abby, why was Congressman Gaetz seeking a presidential pardon?
Well, I mean, maybe for this one reason, I guess. We shouldn't just limit to this one example, to the only thing that he has done that is slightly unethical or partially illegal. So I'm trying to use very kind words.
I noticed that.
Don't-
Sweet. You're so sweet.
So this article is from Politico, and basically what Gaetz did is he was seeking a blanket pardon from Trump right before Trump left the White House. And I mean, long story short, he didn't get it, but he's also now denying that he even asked. So here, Gaetz reported to have sought a blanket pardon from Trump, and this was from Benjamin Dinh and Matt Dixon from the 6th of April. So he allegedly sought a blanket presidential pardon from Donald Trump, just ending weeks of his administration. It was not fulfilled. The request for the blanket preemptive pardon for the Florida Republican and unidentified congressional allies, first reported on Tuesday night by the New York Times, came as the Justice Department was opening an investigation into whether Gaetz had a sexual relationship with a 17-year-old and paid for her to travel across state lines. It's the latest development in a scandal that has embroiled the third-term lawmaker after the Times first reported on the investigation last week. Gaetz is a conservative firebrand, and he has been a vocal defender of the former president. However, the request for a pardon was quickly dismissed by the White House as lawyers and officials considered such a broad move could set a bad precedent, of course. And the Times reported, citing anonymous sources who were briefed on the discussions. It's unclear whether Gaetz or the White House was aware of the Justice Department inquiry when he had made the pardon request. The Times said, although Trump was informed about the request, it was also unclear whether Gaetz had spoken directly with him about the matter. A week ago, the congressman had denied that he had sought a pardon from Trump. When asked about the possibility by Politico, reached by phone on Tuesday night, Gaetz stood by a statement. He said he had not read the Times article. Quote, the recent false allegations against me are something I've never discussed with Trump, pardons or otherwise, he previously told Politico. Gaetz said that he and other lawmakers had met with Trump to discuss a broader pardon strategy after the Capitol riot on January 6th. Sorry about that. And an exchange in which he advised the former president to pardon himself, his family, administration officials, and others who supported Trump's election claims from the charge of insurrection. Trump was later impeached by the House on a charge of inciting an insurrection, but acquitted in the Senate, as we all know now. In his final hours in office, Trump issued dozens of pardons for people ranging from his former advisor, Steve Bannon, to rappers Lil Wayne and Kodak Black.
Sorry, I can't.
So, I mean, my initial thoughts to this, it just, all this is these pardon privileges given are just BS. I mean, how is that even okay? I just don't understand how that's okay to begin with. Because it doesn't seem to matter what the crime is, and they get these pardons, which I don't know. Unethical. That's all I can say.
Here's my understanding that presidential pardons used to at least have to be run by the Supreme Court. And I'm not sure when that changed. But not that the Supreme Court necessarily had to give their approval for them to be effective, but they at least provided a means of inspection, shall we say, that it had to be for a reasonable argument that these guys actually deserve a pardon, as opposed to, well, a stroke of a pen and the guy's pardon. So I'm not sure when that changed, but anyway, it used to be they had to do that.
Well, we know it changed with the last administration. For sure.
Yes,
It
that we
was-
know.
It was, and I wouldn't be surprised you could trace back to trying to cover his butt a little bit. Plus, maybe if you donated enough money, who knows, right? Who knows? But yeah, you're right, Tracy. That's just, and here's the thing with Gaetz. So he knew he was in trouble, and he was just trying to get this blanket pardon to pardon him for anything that he has done or did do or might have done. So he was obviously sweating it out because we know what's going on with him now and the stuff that just keeps popping up about him.
Well, and the idea that you would seek a blanket pardon, like that just seems so.
Yeah, I'm gonna need that to cover everything.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I think the idea that there is evidence that he went and was like after the January 6th insurrection and said, hey, I think us and every Trump supporter should get a pardon. So we're not held accountable for like this. That's insane. Like before it even, like no charges were brought. They're just like, oh yeah, all this shit happened. We don't want to be blamed for it. So let's just ask for a blanket pardon. And then how far does the blanket go? Would it cover this idea, like these basically these sex allegations with underage girls? Like, is it also going to cover that? Like, I think it's completely.
Yeah,
Anything that happens under a blanket.
Which would probably include that.
If you can fit this under a blanket, you're pardoned. Well, obviously, I mean, you don't ask for things like that unless you know that you could get prosecuted for something.
Yeah.
For some of those.
That you've done something, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, well, if you haven't done anything, why do you need a pardon?
Plus, the thing that a presidential pardon could solve for him would be the charge of transporting an underage person across state lines, because that becomes a federal charge once that happens. But anything that just happened in the state of Florida, he'd still be responsible for, regardless of a presidential pardon, because that would be state charges.
Right.
So oh gosh, the level of corruption of the Republican Party anymore is just astounding. Just unbelievable.
The hypocrisy.
Yeah, and the accompanying hypocrisy. Exactly.
Yeah, we can do these things, but we don't get no pardon. It's not fair.
If you're a celebrity under the last administration, there's a pretty high chance that you could get a pardon.
Oh yeah.
And Medal of Freedom Award.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah, and then be rewarded for it on top of it. Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, you needed a pardon? Well, here's the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Yeah. Yes.
You've got your pardon on your shelf, and then you've got
Exactly.
your award
Yeah.
next to your pardon.
Yeah.
I'm assuming there's some sort of like trophy type situation. but
Right. It is
Or
a
plaque.
sad situation.
plaque or something.
And I'm with you, Abby. I don't understand how it is just so readily handed out to individuals that clearly should not be pardoned. That's the key here. I mean, there's no reason to pardon some of these people that were pardoned.
Well, I also think it's like this idea that, I mean, it's so unfair, like especially on socioeconomic and race and ethnicity lines. Like how and why are so many people that live in poverty or are of non-white ethnicity getting charged and being put in prison for like petty crimes or crimes related to the idea of being poor, but yet all of these extremely rich people who commit crimes that affect more than just themselves, more than just a few people, get away with it without, it really does have to do with money and race. And I just, that system is just completely broken.
Oh, well, they don't qualify for pardons. Black and poor people don't qualify. That's in the bylaws.
No,
I mean, exactly. Like there's tons of people that, are serving sentences in jail right now without even reasonable evidence against them, or for, quite petty crimes or, drug related charges. And then people with money just, I don't know. I mean, that goes into, the idea of bail being completely, ridiculous and setting that system up for failure from the beginning. And, it's systemic. I think that it's a systemic issue that has been put in place to basically keep the wealthy and the elite at that level. And, everyone else has to deal with the consequences.
I would agree. I think we're going to have to leave that story there, but Abby, thanks so very much.
Mm-hmm.
And stay with us. We'll take another short break and be right back with more Sounds Reasonable.
Messing with my head again. You had your heart set on me, but these feels they come and go, and they come so easily. Tell me what it is about you that I can't forget. But you're breaking down the walls again, just to set me free. Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you are, we always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling? Why do I, baby, why do I love the way you are, we always leave me? Why do I, baby, why do I love the touch but never love the feeling?
Yep, we're having some sound issues, Tim.
I just realized I
Okay.
never went to share, did I?
Yeah, our music kind of messed up there on us a little bit, but that's all right. You're not here for the music, you're here for us, right? So
Sorry about that. We got a minute of silence. We had our moment of silence. Jeez.
well, perhaps they are. Perhaps our equipment anticipated that we needed a moment of silence.
I forgot to think about anything. Can we have another one?
I was
okay. Well, creationism. The idea that the best explanation for life on Earth is that a deity of some kind willed it into existence has been around for a long time. Of course, everyone's favorite god is who is usually given credit, although there are other creation myths out there as well. But the prevailing creation mythology in the United States is that the Christian God is responsible. Now, interestingly, there are multiple versions of creationism. Some creationists are quote unquote old earth creationists, which in essence propose that their God created the earth and the universe the number of years ago that modern day science puts them. That is about 4.65 and 13.7 billion years ago, respectively. But life needed help to get started, and so that is where their God comes in and helps things along. In contrast, you have the young earth creationists, or your fundamentalists, that believe the earth is around 6,000 to 10,000 years old, and life was pretty much created as we see it now, as described in Genesis and the Bible. Finally, the third sect is the intelligent design crowd, which is a mixture of the two. They accept an ancient earth, they accept that evolution occurs to some degree, but they adhere to the idea of irreducible complexity. That is, some features of life are so complex that they could not have evolved without assistance. Now, none of this would really be an issue were it not for the fact that these various groups continually try to get this nonsense into science education. Recently, an individual from the creationist movement suggested that credit not be given for such courses, which was rather astounding, actually, that we got somebody from that movement to admit this. This is the subject of my story today, which is published on April 4th of this year and authored by the friendly atheist, Hemet Mehta, and is titled Creationists Lash Out After Professor Demands Higher Standards in Science Ed. Now, there is a big kerfuffle in the world of creationists, and it has to do with Christian academics not taking them seriously, because they shouldn't. This started a month ago when Dr. Joshua Swamidas, a professor at Washington University in St. Louis, wrote an opinion piece for the Wall Street Journal all about accreditation and creationism. And this is something I've wondered about for a long time. How in the hell do those fake universities get accredited, and peddle this stuff? But anyway, in a nutshell, he believes the Transnational Association of Christian Colleges and Schools, better known as TRACS, should be allowed to give its stamp of approval to creationism teaching schools like Bob Jones University, even if secular organizations would look down on the school and the group. TRACS may lose its ability to grant such accreditation this October precisely of its lax standards, which again is good news. Let's hope that happens. However, as a compromise and in order to uphold, quote, higher standards on science education, Swamidas suggests TRACS should only grant accreditation to Christian schools that are transparent about their beliefs on transcripts. For example, BJU shouldn't be allowed to give a student an A in biology. They should make it clear that the student got an A in biology that was built on a creationist framework. Swamidas says that would allow the schools to remain accredited for TRACS to maintain its ability to grant accreditation, and no one would be automatically punished for promoting biblical views regarding science. As a matter of academic freedom, scientists should tolerate institutions that teach creation science, which I also think is total nonsense. But deviations from national norms in a science curriculum need to be prominently disclosed, tracked, and reported. In practice, that means transcripts that clearly state which courses and degrees include creation science. And that absolutely should be part of this, no question about it. Credit from courses that include creation science should not be used towards science degrees, nor should they be eligible for transfer to secular institutions. Now, I disagree with him about scientists tolerating those schools. If you went to a fundamentalist Christian college, no graduate program or secular employer should take your degree seriously, at least not if you're planning a future in science. But that's a separate debate for another time. But just as a side note there, McCook Community College was trying to get a creation science curriculum in place, I don't know, about 20 years ago or so now, I suppose. A number of us at UNK got wind of it. We started a letter campaign to the president of McCook College, or McCook Community College, and we got it stopped. It never came about. But Swamidas is right to say that a course tainted with creationism shouldn't earn students any credit if they transfer to a real school. Stepping away from the accreditation argument, what creationists are furious about is Swamidas' belief that a creation-based science class doesn't meet, quote, higher standards on science education. BJU President Steve Pettit responded with a letter in the Wall Street Journal saying his school already had high standards. Dr. Swamidas' compromise, excluding credit from courses presenting evidence for multiple models, would marginalize outstanding scientists with biblical viewpoints about origins. Well, first of all, you can't be a scientist with that approach, but again, that's a discussion for another time. We prefer that adherents to both creation and evolution models continue to coexist as neighbors, friends, and yes, science educators in our pluralistic nation. It does not appear Dr. Swamidas truly shares this desire. So Pettit's argument boils down to this. We teach real science, but we also sprinkle in a lot of Christian bullshit. So that should count.
Yeah, yes. Yes.
Now, I'm gonna jump down here a little bit and go to my good old buddy Ken Ham, and boy is he. Ken Ham also posted a lengthy rant about all this last week,
Sure did.
and he's been hammering at it in the days since. In his commentary, Swamidas is ultimately saying that Christians can have the academic freedom to believe what they want, but really they should be required to teach evolution as fact. And if they're going to teach creation, he specifically singles out young earth creation, to students, those classes should be prominently disclosed, tracked, and reported, including on students' transcripts. Such an approach would harm students who studied at a Christian college from being able to transfer to a different school, example for grad work, and would require them to take more classes since their hard-earned credits wouldn't transfer to secular institutions. So he's not really for Christian colleges or academic freedom whatsoever. Now that's not what Swamidas is saying. Ham would know this if he knew how to read critically. Swamidas is saying those schools should be allowed to teach creationism without losing their accreditation, but no one else should be obligated to treat those courses as legitimate science classes, since they're not. Okay, well, so I'm gonna jump down to the bottom lines here. And then Ham went after the professor for being unqualified to write about this subject at all. It's worth pointing out that this researcher isn't qualified to even write on the question of creation science in the classroom, or to recommend anything pertaining to what he calls young earth creation science, because he really doesn't know the creationist argument well at all, and frankly doesn't know what he is talking about. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black.
Yes. Yeah.
What do I mean? Well, he has already demonstrated that he really doesn't know what biblical creationists, young earth creationists believe. He has written on the topic but makes no attempt to engage any of the scholarly creationist literature published on Adam and Eve. Either scientific or theological, and his numerous attacks on biblical creation science are nothing more than straw men. Excuse me while I step away to laugh at the notion of, quote, scholarly creationist literature on Adam and Eve. Slominus is a professor of laboratory and genomic medicine and biomedical engineering. If nothing else, he knows the difference between real science and pseudoscience. But you don't need an advanced degree to recognize that there's no evidence of the world being created in 6 days as written in the Bible. Students are free to hold that belief, but they don't deserve to be rewarded for it with a science degree. At least no one that is meant to be taken seriously by the greater academic world. So go ahead, guys, and jump in with your comments.
Well, I agree. There's, of course, I don't believe they should be given any credit whatsoever for any creation science curriculum within a science curriculum. It shouldn't even be taught. But so yeah, I mean, it should be noted if they transfer to an institution for graduate work, then they've got deficiencies that they need to make up in their science work. Yeah, it's no different than if someone from it went to a religious high school transferred to public school. There's hours that they've earned at that religious school that they are going to count, and they'll have to toward their graduation requirements at a public school. And they would have to take other classes to make up those hours.
I think that's a good point, Tim, because if you were going from a parochial school to a public school, none of like the theology, I guess, electives would count as credit. So I think that makes sense. I think it's really difficult, though, at the college level, if you're transferring or trying to get into a master's program or something, to figure out which credits are really valid. And I mean, not just even with the idea of religious classes or science classes that are based on creation, which doesn't make any sense, but I know that it's out there. But even like some community colleges have credits from like high school, and they don't really have the same, I don't know how to say this, like it properly. They're kind of BS credits.
There's no rigor. There's no.
Yeah. They lack rigor. That's a good way to put it. They lack rigor, and then the students are still allowed to receive credit at like a university when they go to college. So, I mean, I think there's lots of issues here when you think about what higher education is worth and what should be counted, I guess. But specifically talking about the sciences, I don't see how you could give credit for that. Like, that doesn't make any sense, because that's not what science is. And that's something that I always stress to my students is, it's fine if you have those beliefs, that's your own personal beliefs, your own personal opinions, but that's not science, and that doesn't belong in a science class. And so there needs to be pretty distinct line there of, yeah, that's fine if you want to believe that, but if you're applying it to anything in science, we can't do that.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked about doing this a few times. We just haven't gotten around to it, of having one of our shows dedicated to just what is science, how does it work, what are the principles. So we need to do that, guys. Need to have that show. Maybe we'll do that live next week. Who knows? But I think we'll probably be a little more jovial next week. A little less serious, but we'll see how it goes.
Well, will there be drinks involved?
There probably will be some drinks involved. Yeah.
I think we'll all be in a good mood then. And it's an afternoon, so it's not as
we
early.
should all be in good mood, and
Priming.
they will be cheering Tracy on in an oil bath wrestling match or something. Who knows? Anyway, I think we'll wrap up that story here, and we'll be right back with our crazy story of the week.
Let's see if we can share this right.
I'm feeling so hollow. Don't you know? Don't you know? I'm living in shadow. Don't you know? Don't you know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? I fell for fool's gold. I fell for fool's gold. What did I know? What did I know? You were fool's gold. Yes, I did.
And we're back with our crazy story of the week. Well, I don't know how anyone can doubt it now, but Trump is clearly going to return to power this month. After all, we have a pastor who has talked to God, and God told him that Trump is returning to power in April. Tracy has this remarkable communique for our crazy story of the week. So, Tracy, let us in on the latest Trump news.
I'm trying.
We can hear you.
You can hear me? That's good. That's good. Can see me?
Yep. It can
had
be
it ready
tough
to
to
go.
communicate with God. So,
Trying to do everything with one device in the middle of nowhere. So I thought this was going to happen in March, but we've pushed it out to April.
yep, it's April now.
So this looks like it's from the Friendly Atheist on March 31st by Beth Stoneburner, evangelist. God and I spoke, and Trump will return to power by April. MAGA cultists used to claim that their beloved former president would be reinstated for a second term in January. When that didn't happen, the date was moved to March. Now, right-wing evangelist Nathan French, who claimed last month that God would somehow wipe out the social media companies that banned Donald Trump from their platforms, has a brand new date for Trump's resurrection. Thank goodness, right? French now says April will be the magic month of 45's return. He's about to lay it bare, French continued. I think we're going to find out in April. I think everything's going to change. I see a shift coming. People are waiting to see when is the God of justice going to step in. You're already seeing some of the things on the news. And I don't want to get into too much of that because there's certain things I can't really say. I know that certain things are timed, but I do know that there's a lot more to come. I'll get more words on this. I'm excited. I'm really excited because I know not only is Trump coming back, but it's going to be incredible how God finishes what he began. French's brand of faith is bound to create more atheists than anything else after his God failed to deliver on that promise. Again, as they say, the definition of insanity is doing, or in this case, predicting, the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. Trump isn't coming back. Every prediction to the contrary has been wrong, yet French made the biggest mistake any so-called prophet can make by giving everyone an expiration date for his claims. In 1 month, Joe Biden will still be president. And then what will French do? Just offer a mysterious ways excuse to push the goalposts back even more? Maybe the biggest question is how much longer his followers will put up with these predictions. When will they finally realize these prophets are nothing but frauds? What do you guys think?
They won't.
They're just going to keep.
They'll just
They're
keep
just going to keep.
keep
You know,
keep believing,
I mean,
keep sending them money. You know,
just
keep,
That's-
keep
keep
empty
sending
their
them money.
savings.
Yeah, I mean, that's always always the goal of these charlatans is to keep bilking the masses that are following them for cash. And as long as the cash keeps coming in, why change the message? You know, again.
If there really was a God or higher power, he would have taken care of those people long ago.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know if, I just think they're definitely kooky. I don't know how you believe some of the stuff that, I mean, really, like God put Trump in power, that alone doesn't make sense. And not only that, but like, I had a hard time when Trump was being so well supported by, basically the Christian organizations around the US in general, because he goes against like every value, and it just doesn't, that never added up to me. I could never understand how that could be. But then even after like he was shown to be so corrupt and he was a proponent of violence and all of these things, and then was impeached, and then now he's not in office, they're still saying, oh, but he's going to come back because God's going to bring him back. It just, how and why? And I don't know if we'll ever be able to answer those questions, but I don't understand.
Well,
I have an idea.
okay.
We can make a wish.
Okay. Good one.
It's definitely April.
The
Got it.
dandelions are out. Well, when during the campaign and when the Access Hollywood video came out, and that's when I knew right away that there was no hope, because I mean, women still backed him after he admitted to sexually assaulting and his misogynistic ways, and you had women holding signs up, "Come and grab my pussy." It's just, yeah, you could see they saw the writing on the wall right there.
Yeah,
Right.
the thing of it is, what we have to rationalize is that Trump received the most votes of any president in our history except one, and that was the guy that beat him, Biden.
Yeah, yeah,
Other than that,
yeah.
Trump received more votes than any other president ever has in the history of the United States.
It's just-
And so, whether we like it or not, the guy has got a charismatic hold on individuals that especially if you're a one-issue voter. A lot of people were one-issue voters in this past election, whether it was anti-abortion, which was a big one, because they saw Trump as replacing the Supreme Court in favor of getting rid of abortion rights, which of course he did. And then you have your gun nuts, you have your white supremacists, who voted on race issues. So a lot of people that voted for Trump, I really believe this, were one-issue voters. And they saw Trump as supporting those issues, and they could have cared less about how his personal behavior.
And I guess you look at it this way too, is that you had a person with no moral, no ethics that would just say, tailor to the crowd what he knew they wanted to hear. And so you had all these different groups with their one issue, and he would just out and out lie and play to their to their strengths.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are absolutely right. I do think it was the kind of the one issue voters for the most part, because I think what I saw as an excuse whenever I brought up, like, how could you support such a guy? People always said, well, he doesn't really mean that. He just says those things. Everybody says those things. It doesn't mean that he's really a bad person. He doesn't, he's just real. He's just not politically correct. And for me, I'm like, okay, well, I don't say those things. I don't think I would be associated with anybody that actually did say those things. And I don't know. So, I mean, that's kind of what I heard from a lot of people is like, well, he's just real. And that's good because we always see that, like, hiding your actual feelings in politics. And he wasn't afraid to say things. And I'm like, he should be afraid to say things, because what he's saying is messed up, just completely derogatory.
Yeah, if you want to understand where Trump actually comes from, read his niece's book, Mary Trump's book. It is really good, really good. It explains his family background and how he got this way. Why he ended up like this. It's really good. Well, Tracy, thanks so much for the crazy story. It certainly qualifies. So a quick programming note for next week's show. It will be live and will be broadcast from my home studio with all of us present. Should be a lot of fun. That will wrap us up for this week. If you've enjoyed our program, please pass the word to your friends and associates, believers and non-believers alike. Again, just a reminder that you are welcome to post questions and comments on our Facebook page. Remember, there's an enormous difference between having good reasons for what one accepts to be true and having bad ones. Incidentally, this is the only distinction one needs to become a strict atheist. This has been Dr. Brad for Abby, Tracy, and Tim saying so long.
Bye.
Next week.